communism, land expropriation, and oppression of mother tongue education. If that sounds familiar, I might be speaking about South Africa, or I might be speaking about Hungary.
Ja.
Goeiedag vriende, dit is Joost Strydom, dit is die Orania Beweging. Ons het 'n gas hier by ons. Baie welkom aan elkeen van julle wat kyk. Today with me I have Janos Jeney, and he is Hungarian. He is doing his PhD in cartography, and very specifically doing it in regards to linguistic minorities in the area that was, well, previously Hungary. And Janos, welcome in Orania. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you. Goeiemorgen. I'm starting to learn Afrikaans, so I'm hoping one day I'm going to do the same podcast with you in Afrikaans.
Yeah, well, it's more realistic to do you speaking Afrikaans than me speaking Hungarian. But today you are visiting Orania and you're learning some lessons from the community because you want to go back to your people, because you are more than just a PhD candidate. You are also, well, a freedom fighter.
Yeah. Well, probably that's the most common thing with two of our people. We live 10,000 kilometers from each other, but all the Hungarians who are big patriots are freedom fighters, and the same thing we'll see that all Afrikaners seem to be freedom fighters here as well.
Yeah, the word freedom fighter might be a bit, hijacked by certain groups with more communistic agendas, but in our sense, freedom fighting means, the patriotic type standing up for your people, and so on. Firstly, there's a lot of similarities between the situation that you had in Hungary and what we are experiencing here in South Africa. Give us a broad overview. First, you introduce yourself, and then a bit of context about Hungary and the situation there.
Yeah, well, first of all, as you said, my name is Janos Jeney. Now, just for my family background, what's very interesting is that in Hungary, communism was introduced in 1945 and formally in 1948. But practically they started expropriating land after 1948, which is like the base of communism. But before that, they were already persecuting people, and basically anybody who was against communism landed up in prison. Now, what happened is in 1956, the Hungarian people, on the 23rd of October 1956, the Hungarian people revolted against communism. Now, because it was the big October revolution was on the 7th of November, obviously, because communists can't get anything right, was the big communist revolution. We just called it the big October anti-communist revolution. And that's when my grandparents had to flee Hungary. And they went to Austria. And the interesting thing is they were in a refugee camp, and the South African government actually granted them refuge. So that's how they landed up in South Africa. As far as I know, first in Vereniging and then in Durban, because don't forget, a refugee back then took any job he got because they wanted to survive. It wasn't like nowadays in Europe where these guys are running around all over the place and then demanding stuff without having to work. So this was my first connection with South Africa. I was actually born in Durban, but when in 1994 the changes came, we felt it's getting very communistic. Now, we have a saying in the family saying that communism seemed to reach my grandfather in the grave, even though he was fleeing communism. So this basically destined us for being very anti-communist. And in Hungary, basically, as I said, they started expropriating land. Now, my family was very heavily affected with this. That the land that was expropriated from them was basically what they lived off. So now what are they going to do? And to make it even worse, what they said is that because you were a bourgeoisie, because you had land, you had to work that land for free, and you had work quotas. So they didn't even let you off saying, okay, you gave in the land and you can get a job wherever you want. The people who brought the land into the communist system had to work it without getting paid for it. And you even got fined for collecting wheat that was dropped by the people working the land. Now, this is completely against the Bible, because if I understand it correctly, already in the Old Testament, basically you had to leave a certain amount of wheat that dropped down for the poor to collect. So communism is completely against God's will as far as I'm concerned. Now, so we've been through this. And
very relevant to us today, because just very recently The President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, signed into law land expropriation bill that states that land can be taken, land can be expropriated on the basis of some old government laws. But now they added something called a zero value, null value transaction. So you have to be compensated for the land, but that compensation can be of null value. So basically no compensation. That is the reality in South Africa in 2025. It's just been signed. Hearing some of the stories that you're sharing now, obviously it's to a great concern. This is the way to communism. Well, we know the South African government is the ANC is born out of communistic tendencies, and but this is just really getting very worrisome for us, and I think Hungary is proof that it's not a good way to go down.
Well, don't forget that after 1991 in Hungary, they started having to return land to the previous owner. And it was a complete chaos because it wasn't really recorded who the land previously belonged to.
So the state decides.
And that was a very corrupt era in Hungary. And because you had to basically declare yourself what your land was. Now you can imagine that some people declared more land and better land and so on. Yeah. So actually what you said, when I arrived in Orania, there's a sign just up the road which says, I can't remember the name of the company, that this land belongs to that company. And now I also said that it could be concerning for you. I hope they're not going to take Orania, because it's...
Well, Orania's got a major advantage in the sense that this is communal, and that's exactly why Orania is run in the mechanism of a share block company. So it's not an individual owner, but it's a communal owner. Every person that owns land in the main town is sharing that. You have your own private property, obviously, but the land, the totality of the land, is a communal project which actually helps us against land expropriation.
Yeah, but don't forget that communism always gets introduced gradually.
Yes.
So you have to fight this thing very hard, because if you let this thing go, say it's not going to affect me, then what's going to happen?
That is not our sentiment.
Then what's going to happen is next time it will affect you when they feel, okay, now we've expropriated all single owners, now we're going to start expropriating communal owners or companies or whatever.
Definitely. No, I'm just, the sentiment is not that Orania is safe and everyone else must just have their troubles. I think we have a mechanism that helps us a bit, but we're obviously gravely concerned for Afrikaners and the total South African economy around the country. Janos, you experienced communism. Hungary was freed from it, and you have currently a stable government and very interesting sets of laws, very conservative and so on. But there are still some of your people who are oppressed that used to be in Hungarian territory. Tell us a bit more about the Hungarians outside of Hungary.
Yes, now, so just as a historical context, Hungary obviously was on the losing side of the First World War. Now, basically its neighbors, as well as many greater powers on the victor side, were interested in slicing up Hungary. And basically Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory and 1/3 of its Hungarian-speaking population. Now, yes, it was a multi-ethnic state. We're not talking about that. We're not denying that. What I'm saying is that when President Woodrow Wilson of America said that they want the borders along ethnic lines, well, they didn't manage to do that. Instead, what they did manage to do is they removed one multi-ethnic state from the middle of Europe, and they created multiple ones. Now, these multiple multi-ethnic states started splitting up even into more. Like, for example, they created one big Yugoslavia, which is an extremely corrupt state in Europe. And now, well, where's Yugoslavia? It's history. But the thing is that territories of Hungary, which were transferred to Yugoslavia, are partially now in Croatia, a little bit in Slovenia, and a very large part in Serbia. Now, obviously the Croatian and Slovene territories are very small, so we don't have a big issue regarding that. For example, Serbia, Romania, Ukraine, and Slovakia have large Hungarian populations. Now, in the case of Ukraine, that's large for us, of 200,000 minority. It's not large for the whole Ukrainian population. But what we have is, we have acts in these countries which try and limit, oppress, and for example, in Ukraine, outright ban Hungarian language education.
Sounds familiar to
In
us.
Slovakia, you even have a bill, it's called a language law, which even defines the language of communication in healthcare.
Hospitals and such.
Yes, hospitals or your GP. Well, they can't really control it at the GP because it's the two of you in there. But in hospitals, you have people checking on it. Now, if somebody's sick, you communicate with them however you can because you need to find out as much information as possible. With the mother tongue education, it's very important that a Hungarian child is going to perform much better if they're taught their languages, the subjects in Hungarian. We're obviously not talking about language subjects like English, for example, or Ukrainian, for example, in Ukraine, but you have to keep in mind, we're talking about Hungarian teachers teaching Hungarian children, for example, mathematics. They want them to teach them in Ukrainian. Now, that's not going to work.
So on the one hand, you have in your school system a denial of teaching kids in their mother tongue. On the other hand, in hospitals, doctors and nurses are restricted, even if they are Hungarian speaking, to speak with patients who are also Hungarian speaking in Hungarian.
Yes.
So that is a big issue.
And also, for example, in municipal offices, if you want to apply for your passport, because these people, don't forget that the way the citizenship law works in Hungary, if you're born to Hungarian parents anywhere in the world, you automatically become a Hungarian citizen. It's totally involuntary. You don't have to apply for it. But because you're born in the country of, let's say, Romania or Slovakia, you also get their citizenship. So if they want to apply, let's say, for a Romanian passport, for whatever reason, or Romanian ID, which they need, then they can't go into the office speaking Hungarian. Or for example, in these countries, and unfortunately in Hungary for now as well, but I hope that's going to change, you have to have basically two ceremonies of your wedding. You do it once in the church, and once you have to have it approved by the state, where you go to the local municipal office and it gets approved by the state. I would really love to have the church wedding being approved by the state, because that would be that doesn't mean what the communists say, that we would make it compulsory. What it means is that you don't have to do that other ceremony, because I don't see it as important, because basically getting married is your main witness is God and not the state. But I understand why you, for legal reasons, have to do that. Now, you can't do that, for example, in Transylvania without the person from the municipal office wearing the Romanian flag. So many people, many Hungarians I know, actually went to do their wedding in Hungary because they didn't want that. And now...
So the situation is basically as follows. You have about 10 million Hungarians living in Hungary.
Yeah. And
you have about 5 million living outside of Hungary.
On the ancient lands, because the reason why it's important...
It used to be Hungary.
Yeah, because we also have a Hungarian diaspora living outside these areas who fled communism, especially in 1956, but afterwards there were also some flights. And what we are demanding, especially Transylvania, is very interesting because they have a large area where it's totally Hungarian. So it's minority on a national level, but it's majority on a local level. And we are demanding that we get self-governance and self-determination, and things like, for example, policing, because don't forget, the police is not only there to prevent crime, they're also enforcing the will of the government.
We know that very well in South Africa.
Yeah. And if this expropriation without compensation communist bill gets far enough, you're going to have the police trying to enforce that as well.
Yes.
The other thing is, that we demand is that the taxes paid by the residents of this autonomous area go to the autonomous area itself, not to the central government. Because in Transylvania, for example, the taxes paid by the Transylvanian Hungarians seem to disappear.
Yes.
Because the roads are in a much worse condition in the Hungarian areas than anywhere else in the country. But they're paying the same taxes. There are no highways, for example, over there. Or for example, the North Transylvanian Highway is being built officially since, I think, 2007, if I remember correctly. And it still has very short sections that have been built, and other sections you have to drive through towns for 300 kilometers, and it's a very slow going way. And that's a big problem because we want contacts of Hungary between the Hungarian territories and Transylvania, and it's not irrelevant if you drive 50 or 150 to get there, because that's a big time issue.
Yeah, I understand. So the Hungarians who are now in their ancient lands but trapped under foreign governments, they are being oppressed on language, they are being oppressed on by the mechanisms of state, and your answer to that is you want more autonomy and you want more self-government, and that is partially one of the reasons why you're in Orania.
Yeah, for example, another thing that we want is that the government, the Romanian government, does not interfere with decisions of school boards on language policy, for example.
Very similar. So tell me, you've been in Orania for a few days now.
Yeah.
What have you seen that is relevant to you? If I understand correctly, you're looking at two methods of growing self-determination. That is institutional and territorial.
Yeah. So before I say that, I want to say I feel more like I'm in Hungary than in South Africa, because firstly, I can walk on the streets with my camera with it not being snatched.
Yeah, in Orania.
Yes. Secondly, when I walk on the streets or drive through the streets, they're clean. And and another thing that's very interesting is, so far in Hungary, in a rural setting, you greet everybody regardless of if you know them or not. And I experienced the same thing here in Orania. You just walk past and greet them. That's very nice. So, well, there are two things that I experienced. First of all, it's very positive to see that you didn't ask the government if you can do this. You just did it. It's a town for Afrikaners. It's not about keeping people apart from everybody else, is staying apart, which I feel. Afrikaners do all work. There's no exploitation of black people here, because that just doesn't happen. You don't see that. I mean, I remember first morning I woke up here in Orania, I went out of the guest house, I looked up on the roof because there was some noise coming from the roof, and I could see two white guys doing maintenance work, and I said, wow, I've never seen this in South Africa before. Well, and then when I drove out of the place, there were another two white guys basically maintaining the municipal area as far as the plants are concerned. Again, I don't know where else you see this in South Africa. So basically, it was pretty obvious to me Afrikaners are doing all the work here, which gives you a very strong part in self-determination, because you're not reliant on other people to do any work in here. My other impression of Orania is it was very good meeting. Well, actually, I visited both schools so far, and there are two things that, even though the two schools are very different from each other, there are two things I experienced with the two schools. The one is mother tongue education, and all the kids were very proud of being taught in their mother tongue, as were the teachers. Secondly, Christian values. Now, don't forget, Hungary is a Christian country. All our family policies are based around the Bible. Our national anthem starts with God Bless Hungary, as does our constitution. And we believe in how should I say, we don't believe in that the government is part of the church, but it's got a similar goal of basically having a country based on Christian values, respect of property, respecting property rights. So this bill that you were talking about would fail in Hungary very quickly. The Constitutional Court would just force the government to scrap it. I mean, I'm not saying this government is going to introduce bills like this, but it just wouldn't operate. And as I said, this Orania, the main difference between being in Hungary and being in Orania is that everybody speaks Afrikaans here and everybody speaks Hungarian in Hungary. But other than that, the whole mentality is very similar. There's no crime. And often I feel very bad about it when I see things being published about Orania in a very negative light, and it's very similar things are published by the left on Hungary in a very negative light. And also I feel that family is very important for you guys as well, because that's the basis of your community. It's not the individual, it's the family. Because when I asked the communications head of the Orania municipality, he actually told me when somebody applies for residency in a family setting, husband and wife go together in the interview. You're not taking individuals in that case. If they're married, you're taking the family. And the family, in my opinion, has to stay together. For example, I don't believe that God wants us to divorce. So divorce is something, in my opinion, against God's will, because He basically is your primary witness of your marriage. So I think these values are very positive for me in Orania. Yes. And
so on that note, we've spoken a bit about the history of Hungary. We spoke about the context where you have Hungarians in Transylvania being oppressed for language, for their culture and for their beliefs. We spoke a bit about the fact that you actually are here in Orania to learn about both institutional self-determination and territorial self-determination, because you work very hard to establish that in the Transylvania area as well for Hungarians, in order to keep taxes, in order to have an autonomous police force and to make their own decisions. And now you've referenced something very important that I think Afrikaners can learn from as well, and that's the Hungarian outlook on family. Just very shortly, give us a bit of a perspective on what Hungary does to promote family in terms of the legal framework.
Yes. So right now we're still working on it, because at the moment we were only able to implement these things for Hungarians living in Hungary, but we want to spread it into the neighboring countries for the Hungarians, because what we say is your community. So what we have is we have the individual who's part of a family. The family is part of a community, and the community is part of the nation. And we even have certain subcategories in that, because we say that, for example, the Transylvanian Hungarians have a unique culture within Hungary, so that's a special community. And now what we do is, first of all, it's just the tax system. In Hungary, the income tax is very simple. In the basic sense, you have a maximum of 15% income tax.
15% max.
Yeah, and that is not dependent on your income. So regardless of how much income you have, in the basic situation, you pay 15%. Now, when you have the first child, the problem is I don't know the exact numbers, because they've just changed a few days ago, and I haven't had time to get it, because they just raised the tax deduction. But it's not a percentage; it's an exact amount that gets deducted from your income tax.
Because you have a child.
Yes. When you get a second child, then added to that is double the amount. So you have the first amount and you have the double amount deducted. And this goes on to 4 children when you don't pay income tax at all.
So if you have 4 children, no income tax.
Yes. And now another thing is that in the basic sense, up to 3 children, this is only valid until your child reaches the age of 18. Which can be extended if the child goes to university, if you support them until the age of 25. But if you have 4 children, mothers for now, but I don't know, I think they're going to expand that to the whole family, don't pay income tax for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
So this basically means that the tax system is organized in such a way that it encourages families, it encourages children, because Hungary's got a demographic problem, which you might not see in South Africa in the basic statistics, but I see it in the Afrikaners, that we are losing people because the death rate is much higher than the birth rate. Now this actually traces back all the way to the 2 world wars, when a lot of men were killed, and if you don't have men, you're not going to have pregnancy among women, so your numbers go down. And then one thing that happened in Hungary, which made it even worse, is the communist government in the 1950s stated we need working hands. So they started encouraging birth rates, and they didn't care if the woman is married or not, which again is against the will of God to just have children like that. But they didn't look upon the child as being a member of a family. They looked upon it as a future working asset. And that led to the fact of having a lot of children growing up without families. And they basically became very selfish and didn't even bother to get married. So the birth rate started declining. And another thing that communism caused, especially in the 1980s, that you had a huge suicide rate. There was a time when Hungary had the biggest suicide rate in the whole world.
Wow.
Now, with this family policies, suicide is declining as well. Because obviously when people have a Christian way of life, you're not going to get into a situation where you want to do that. So it has improved by tremendous amounts of that.
Fantastic. So we have things that Hungarians can learn from Afrikaners, and especially from Orania, and we have also, I think, a lot of things that Afrikaners can learn from Hungary in terms of how you structure your government, pro-family and so on. So just to end the conversation in a few sentences very shortly, what's the future looking like?
Okay, now there are 2 things. I would like to start with the situation outside of Hungary. We don't know, the Romanian government doesn't want to let our autonomous claims go through. Now this is something that we're learning from Afrikaners, that you didn't ask the government if you're allowed to have Orania or not. Now, we are very close to getting to that, and I'd like to emphasize that this can go anyway. The one thing that we want to lock out is we don't want to end up getting into a war, because there were no wars in history that benefited Hungary. Other than that, I can imagine anything on a diplomatic level to force the Romanian government to give us autonomy, up until the point where, if we can do it without a war, I'm not even against secession. I mean, I think we spoke about it on the Afrikaner level as well earlier on. But having said that, that's not our primary goal right now, because I don't see it being possible. But we do want to end the oppression of Hungarians, and we do want to have I feel we should have very good relationship with the Afrikaners. And that's going on because we're having a very good relation for the last 2 or 3 years with the Afrikaner institutions so far. AfriForum and Solidariteit, and these people, especially Ernst Roots, loves visiting Hungary. I meet him at least twice a year over there. But I do feel that we want to move into having good relations with Orania. And also I took Ernst to Transylvania last year, because I want to have relations between the Afrikaners and the Hungarian minority institutions as well. The other thing we learn is that we don't rely on government to build our institutions. We have to build them ourselves. This is the reason why I think South Africa is very important for us, especially the Afrikaner. Now, you spoke about what you can learn from government. At the moment, you guys don't have a government because there's no Afrikaner government. So it would be interesting to know how you imagine creating an Afrikaner government, because you can't rely on a communist government who wants to take your land. Because I think that's exactly the opposite of what government should do, because one of the roles of government is to protect private property.
Yeah.
And right now they're stealing it, because I'm sorry to say, but communism is nothing other than state aided institutionalized theft of property. That's what communism is. And to top it up, it's even not only state institutionalized theft of property, it can lead to state institutionalized murder, because if you don't agree with communism, they're going to persecute you, and then in the end you will be hung or shot or done whatever.
So it's a mixture of concern for our futures and excitement for what we can achieve if we not only resist this tyrannical communist tendencies, but also if we are creative enough to keep making plans, as I think Orania is one of the Afrikaners' answers to the situation. There are others as well with other plans, but you know, working together and so on. And then also Hungarians outside of Hungary, so that they can continue making plans. You know, the excitement of taking a plan and going with it. It can ultimately lead to more freedom, more autonomy, more self-determination, whether institutional or territorial, as I think is the best. I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah.
Thank you for visiting Orania. I hope that we can send a delegation to Hungary to learn from some of the things that you've been doing, especially on government side, but also in regards to the minorities in Transylvania. And thank you very much. It's a privilege having you here as a guest of the Orania movement and visitor in Orania.
Pleasure, and I'd just like to say, if we unite our forces, I think we're going to have a better chance of winning. So absolutely. I think this is my first visit and not my last visit to Orania.
Fantastic, that is good news. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos like this. En dan laastens, groot woord van dank vir elkeen wat natuurlik ons ondersteun en hierdie video kyk en versprei, maar ook vir elke Orania Beweging lid of donateur. Dit maak dit vir ons moontlik om vanuit die Orania Beweging se kantoor te skakel met mense wat ons saak steun, wat miskien in dieselfde situasie is, om by hulle te leer en sodat hulle by ons kan leer. Elke Orania Beweging lid, elke donateur, maak dit vir ons moontlik. Ons is julle ongelooflik dankbaar, want julle help eintlik ons vryheid vlerke gee. So baie dankie en tot ons weer gesels. Thank you.
Thank you very much.